Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. Well, I go back to school in a few days, so this is going to be the last video I do over the course of the summer. And the last few, as I've mentioned before, I've been kind of having some fun with. I've been doing some lists, some of my favorite species, some of the best intermediate species, and we're going to end the summer off with what's going to be my top 15 plus, once again, favorite spiders that I currently keep. Now, I did this video a couple years ago, but after doing some of the ones this summer, I had a couple people come forward and say, hey, can you do an update of that one? I said I would take a look and see if enough has changed to warrant a new list. Because to be completely honest, and I want to make this very, very clear, when I make these lists, they're meant for fun. They're a fun way to kind of showcase some of the spiders that I keep, share some of the information I've learned about them. They're not meant to be particularly educational, although I try to slip in some educational stuff as we go. And in a situation like this, it could change day to day which ones my favorites are. And there's a couple that are not on the list this time around. I still adore them. I just wanted to mix things up a bit. One of the spiders that was on the list last time has passed away. That was my Harpactera pulchripes female that I absolutely adored, one of my favorite all-time spiders. So she's not on it anymore. So what I did is I basically walked up and I tried to make a note of the spiders that when I come up in the tarantula room and I've got my flashlight on, which are the ones I'm immediately drawn to, which are the ones I'm watching because I'm waiting to see their color transformations, or in one case, waiting to see how big their carapace gets. That's kind of what I use for parameters, and I came up with this list here. As you'll see at the end, there's some that didn't make it, that as soon as I ended up editing this, I thought to myself, how could these guys not be on the list? Because I adore them. The thing is, I love all the spiders I keep. There's not a spider in this room that I look at and go, eh. So it's very difficult to break down. I don't know what I've got now, probably 100 species, 115 species or whatever that I've kept. Just that handful that are just the ones that if I had to get rid of them all, I would keep them. And even going back to that one where if I could only keep 5, that it doesn't quite line up. So just know this is for fun. So with all of that out of the way, what we're going to do now is take a look at the top 15 spiders, 15 plus spiders. You'll see at the end, I have a couple more in my collection that are my current favorites, at least at the moment. All right, kicking this list off is a spider that I actually for a very long time didn't have any interest in, and boy was I mistaken. We're looking at my Oresus walkeneri, or ladybird spider, or velvet spider. I got this one as a tiny sling from Tom Patterson back in January of 2022. It was a freebie, and if I'm honest, I wasn't sure what I thought of it at the time. A lot of people were keeping them. They seemed to be very popular, and I'd kind of been sleeping on them for quite some time. I actually did a podcast about how I had ignored velvet spiders and they just didn't seem to be my cup of tea, and made fun of myself for doing so because, man, was I wrong. This one freaked me out at first because she was super tiny, and almost every spiderling I have ever kept needed some type of moisture in its substrate, or a water dish, or a misting. These guys don't need any of that. They need dry substrate at all times. They need it bone dry. No water dish, no sprinkling water on the webbing, no misting. It just kind of blew my mind. So as I fed this spider and as it got bigger, I kept waiting for it to die because it just seemed weird keeping it dry, but it didn't. It thrived, and I had a blast watching it grow from a teeny tiny sling to this young adult female that I have here. Now, these guys are hardy. They are very fun to watch hunt. They don't usually attack the prey at them up top. They will hide underneath the webbing, as you can see this one is doing here, and they grab the prey at them and bite it from underneath the webbing, which I found to be incredibly cool. They're just absolutely adorable, and they seem to have a lot of personality for a little small spider. Now, the one big worry about them is they can be very expensive, especially here in the US, but do know they do live a lot longer than your normal true spider. So if you pick one up and you get a female, you're going to have it for a few years. Now, next up on this list, we have a Xenestus species. I have chosen Xenestus intermedia, or the Amazon blue bloom. Now, if I'm being completely honest here, there are going to be a few instances on this list where I truly love an entire genus. In these cases, I'm going to pick one spider to represent my favorite from that genus. And when I say favorite, I'm even doing the air quotes now. In this instance, I've chosen the Xenestus intermedia. Since being rehoused, this girl here has been much more visible and, more importantly, calm, which has made her an amazing showcase spider. I've talked about how I picked up a lot of Xenestus species as slings, and from the sling stage to juvenile stage, they were not only very, very skittish, but quick to kick hairs, and the hairs kind of bother me a bit. I got this girl as an 1.75" sling back in July of 2020, and she's now around 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Anytime I enter the tarantula room, she is sitting right out in the open looking pretty. With Xenestus species, I love the contrast of the purplish carapaces and the dark velvety femurs. And speaking of legs, they are quite leggy spiders, especially as slings, and they can really use those legs to boogie if motivated. I currently have Xenestus species blue, bright, species tenebrous, and amanus, but the X intermedia has really become one of my all-time favorites. Now again, speaking of loving an entire genus, everyone is well aware of my love of the genus Phormictopus. I currently keep about 16 species or regional variants, and I love every single one of them. So for this video, I chose one that I've been keeping a close eye on due to the fact that it supposedly grows into a purple spider. So here we're going to talk about Phormictopus Bayahibe, or what I'm going to call Phormictopus atachromatus Bayahibe, and I'll tell you why. I posted some pictures recently up on Instagram, and I've been told from a very reputable source who has studied Phormictopus on the island of Hispaniola for many, many years that the Bayahibe are likely just a regional variant of the Phormictopus atachromatus. Apparently, ones from the Bayahibe region can indeed be purple. So again, the genus is a mess. Hopefully someone sorts it out someday, as I believe that many of the new quote-unquote species sold on the market for exorbitant prices are just variants of Cancerides and atachromatus. But that aside, these spiders are getting quite large, with my females reaching around 6 inches or 15 centimeters. And as you can see, they're sporting a bit of purple on their femurs. Now, it's not as deep and rich as it was for the Dominican violet or Dominican purples, but they're definitely turning purple. One of my males matured earlier this year, and you can see he is quite purple overall, with the exception of that weird orangey carapace, just a cool looking spider. But that said, many Phormictopus species males are purple, so who knows? I'll be curious to see how my females' colors change as they continue to grow, and if these purplish tones intensify or fade with age. But that waiting process, that hope that they're going to turn out super purple, is what's making this one of my favorite spiders to watch right now. So next up on the list, we have one of my all-time favorite species, the Grammostola rosea, or Chilean rose here. Anyone that has followed my channel or podcast knows that my first spider ever was the queen, an adult G. porteri, now G. rosea, that I had for around 25 years. She was almost full grown when I got her, which makes me think she was anywhere from 35 to 40 years old when she passed away. I absolutely adored this spider, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking to you all. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that this species has a special place in my heart. This here is my Grammostola rosea juvenile, and she happens to have become one of my favorite all-time spiders. I got this girl as a tiny sling back in January of 2014, and she is now a whopping 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters. You heard me right, she is barely growing. For a while, this little girl just seemed to refuse to grow, taking forever in between molts and putting on no noticeable size with each shed. She also went through a very quirky stage as a sling, where she hung up on top of her cork bark I put in her enclosure, almost like she was an arboreal, which made her kind of cute. Nowadays, she's quite visible and active, and as you can see, she has done quite a bit of digging in her enclosure. I'm pretty sure as this young lady reaches adulthood, probably in another decade or so, she will move up a bit on this list. All right, I'm sure a lot of people are waiting for this one to appear. At number 11, we have an Aphanopelma caucodes, or Arizona blonde, and this is Nikki. If you've followed my channel for any amount of time, you certainly know Nikki, my A. caucodes. I picked her up way back in 2013 as an 1.5" sling, and at that time, she drove me nuts by burrowing and not being very interested in food. As a matter of fact, she would not take live prey for quite some time. I had to pre-kill everything I put in there, or else she wouldn't touch it. She would cower in a corner. And also, for 3 years straight, she would cover up her burrow entrance in October and reappear in early April almost to the day every single year. Once she molted a couple times, she started to eat better, and she developed quite a personality since then, being quite spunky and inquisitive. This is one of the spiders that rushes out to investigate whenever I open her enclosure. She shows no fear. She bolts from her hide to see what's up. On more than one occasion, I've had to close the enclosure to keep her from going on a walkabout. Although I've had her for 12 years, she's still a little one, pushing only about 4 inches or 10 centimeters in leg span. Despite her diminutive proportions, her big personality has made her a favorite of many who watch this channel. So at number 10, we have a brand new species that I've just started growing up, and one that a lot of folks probably haven't heard about, but I think they should. We have theraphosidized species Megacarapace. I read about these in an article back in 2020, and I was immediately fascinated by this new species. So I was elated when Tom Patterson from Hardcore Arachnids got some in back in April of 2023. I grabbed one, and it quickly became one of my favorites in my collection. This is one of those spiders that there isn't much out there about them, so I'm excited by each and every molt to see what it'll bring. Now, although this is definitely a fossorial species, and this one has spent much of its sling stage hidden, it is now out quite a bit. When I went to get footage for this video, he or she sat out in the open for a while and allowed me to get some shots. Now, if you look closely, you can see the oddly elongated carapace that gives this species its name. I've heard that the carapace of this species continues to grow and elongate as it puts on size. If it does reach its supposed max leg span of 6 inches, I will be very interested to see how long its carapace gets. But when talking about spiders that fascinate me and that I love and that I'm always looking in their enclosures, the theraphosidized species Megacarapace has to be included on this list. Now, at number 9, and I'll be honest, this probably should be further down the list, but we're going to put it here because it appears in every list of favorites that I ever make. We have Selenobrachy philippinus X Orphanacus. It used to be Orphanacus philippinus, or the Philippine tangerine. When I picked up 2 large S. philippinus slings way back in 2012, I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. Most of what I had read about these beautiful orange spiders was that they were ornery at best and aggressive at worst. However, as I grew them up, I found that mine were actually quite skittish and shy fossorials that would much rather run to their burrows and stand their ground. And that tangerine orange coloration, videos and photos just don't do it justice. I was so enamored with this species that when it came time to design my website header, it was a photo of one of my females that I used. Heck, even my orange logo was based on this spider. Over the years, I've raised several of these stunning spiders, and I even paired one of my original females back in 2019. And the female that you see here is one of her offspring. In my experience, O. philippinus young adults often abandon their burrows and begin webbing on the surface. Not only is this great for folks who like silk, but the white really makes their colors pop. One of the first Old World species I ever kept, the S. philippinus, remains one of my favorite all-time spiders. And this girl here is going to continue my tradition of always having one of this species in my collection. Now, for number 8 on this list, this one was on the last list as well, we have my Brachypelma classy, or Mexican pink tarantula. Back in 2016, I ordered a couple of spiders from a new vendor, and I was sent a couple freebies with the order. One of them was this beautiful lady here. Now, if I'm being honest, at that time, I was heavily into keeping Old World spiders, and I wasn't particularly enthused by this spider at all. Boy, was I a fool. This little sling ate well, grew fairly quickly for a Brachypelma species, and once it hit the juvenile stage and those colors started to show, I was completely sold on them. There is just something about those pinkish legs contrasting with the overall black base coloration of the spider. Although she burrowed a bit until she was a large juvenile, my girl is always out in the open now, which is great because I love admiring her. Now, a little note about this spider. This one here could be a poster child for tarantulas changing their disposition after a molt. When I last covered this topic 2 years ago, I had mentioned that my B. classy was one of the calmest spiders that I kept. Well, after her last molt, she became much more skittish and defensive. I still love her to death, but this is why I caution folks that a tarantula that will tolerate handling one day can be quite the handful the next. Regardless, my B. colossi is still one of the most stunning tarantulas that I keep today. So number 7 is not a tarantula. It is my Gelomorph, but it needs to be on the list. This is my Linnathelle phalanx, or tiger curtain-web spider. For years, I avoided keeping any Dipluridae, as I had read that not only do they get huge, but they're quite fast as well. And back when I was checking them out, most folks referred to them as funnel web spiders. So the common name had me thinking that they were potentially quite venomous too. Finally, back in 2021, I picked up my first Linnathelle phalanx. It didn't take long to see what I had been missing for all of those years. Not only do these spiders eat great, grow quickly, and have an amazing feeding response, but they are webbing machines. And they are freaking gorgeous. They use those giant spinnerets to festoon their enclosures in thick silk. They hide and wait for unfortunate prey items to trigger the webbing before bursting out and grabbing it. Since getting my L. phalanx, I acquired 4 more species of Dipluridae, and they soon became some of my favorite spiders to keep and to feed. This is one of those spiders that every time I come up to the tarantula room, I go over to where I keep my Dipluridae, I get my flashlight out, and I check in on them. And to date, when I post feeding videos, I always try to get some of these guys bursting out of their web palaces to grab their prey. So this one here, my female L. phalanx, is by far one of my favorite spiders in my collection, and the one that started off my love for Dipluridae. All right, number 6. This one shouldn't come as a surprise. I have Theraphosa blondi, or the Goliath bird eater. So the last time I attempted this list, I chose the amazing T. apophysis to represent this genus. Truth be told, I love all 3 of the Theraphosa that I keep. However, this time around, I'm picking my massive Theraphosa blondi female. This girl here is now over 9 inches, or 23 centimeters, and she is truly a sight to behold. Now, I've heard it said that these guys are just big brown spiders, like arachnids larger than most human hands are not a big deal. Whatever. Obviously, hobbyists have different tastes when it comes to spiders, and I get that this species just might not do it for some folks. However, I do think that many that say the species is boring have not seen one in person. It's difficult to convey their sheer mass and size on camera. My 2 adult females are amazing hunters, often taking down 3 adult dubia in one feeding. They are also quite visible, which is great for when I have folks up to my tarantula room. Inevitably, someone will ask which spider is my largest, and I'm proud to direct them back to check out my T. blondies. I've been keeping for a long time now, and some of the novelty of keeping giant spiders has faded a bit over the years. However, this species is still able to conjure that sense of awe I used to feel back in the day when I first got into the hobby. Big, beautiful, great eaters, always out in the open. The T. blondi are easily one of my favorite spiders of all, and this female here definitely deserves her spot as number 6 on this list. So next up, at number 5, we have Psalmopoeus cambridgei, or the Trinidad chevron. For quite a few years, I had very little interest in keeping arboreal species, limiting my tree dwellers to one of my favorite genera of tarantulas, Poecilotheria. However, after noticing that a vendor had the P. cambridgei listed as a freebie, I decided to give one a shot. I'm glad that I did, as not only did my big female become one of my favorite spiders, but she got me hooked on the genus Psalmopoeus. This species brings a lot to the table, in my opinion. They are easy to keep, eat great, grow quickly, and are usually quite visible as adults. As a bonus, females are usually green, and there are very few green tarantulas in the hobby. I've raised up 7 of these over the years, and all of mine have been quite well behaved, even the mature males. Sure, Psalmos can be fast, but mine have never seemed particularly inclined to use that speed unless it's for hunting down a juicy cricket or roach. I'm actually raising up another young adult female at the moment, as this girl is getting very old, and I want to make sure that I always have this species in my collection. Although I love all my Psalmopoeus species, and my P. victoria is becoming a huge favorite, my old P. cambridgei remains my favorite of the bunch. All right, anybody that watches my channel knows that we have to have a Poecilotheria species on this list. So at number 4, I have included Poecilotheria vittata, or the ghost ornamental. I got my first back in 2012, and although I thought that I was getting a 3-inch juvenile, the spider that arrived was well over 4 inches or 10 centimeters. This was my first pokey, and to say that I was a bit intimidated would be an understatement. I had heard a lot about these guys being very fast, potentially defensive, and obviously the potency of their bite is legendary. However, during the rehousing, the spider surprised me by being rather shy and calm overall. When we went to rehouse her into an adult enclosure a year or so later, my oldest son and I were ridiculously cautious, but again, she posed no issues at all. This made me rethink what I had heard about this genus, and it wasn't long before I was buying every Poecilotheria species I could find. Now, picking my favorite pokey is like picking a favorite child. I love them all equally for different reasons. However, when cornered, I usually go to the P. vittata as it was my first, and I'm enamored by the black, gray, and white tarantulas. Also, when folks ask for a good quote-unquote beginner pokey, if there's such a thing, I usually recommend the P. vittata or regalis. Mine have always been very well behaved, visible, and which is great as they are simply stunning spiders. So the P. vittata or ghost ornamental, my girl here, absolutely deserves a spot in this list. Maybe even a higher spot on this list, but right now I have her as number 4. Now we're at number 3 on the list, and this spider definitely deserves this spot. I have 2 females, and they are easily 2 of the favorite spiders, my favorite spiders I have ever kept. We were talking about Eucratocellus pachypus, or the stout leg baboon. Now, I, for a while, would show off my pachypus anytime I got the chance, and people would get so upset with me because you couldn't find them anywhere, but that has changed recently, thank God. Right here, this one is moving up on the list from 2 years ago because it is one of the most adorable species of tarantulas in the hobby. I got my first E. pachypus over 12 years ago, and at the time, they were both gangly little juveniles. I had read that this species was an excellent one to start with for those looking to move into keeping old worlds, and I really wanted to give them a shot. Plus, I was absolutely enamored by those thick, fluffy back legs. And their reputation for being very laid back proved to be well deserved, as both of mine have been amazingly docile and calm overall. Unlike many other fossorial species, the E. pachypus build vertical burrows. They wait inside for prey and then use those thick back legs to explode out to catch it. It's fantastically fun to watch. Now, for over a decade, this species has been all but absent from the hobby. However, in the past year or so, there have been several batches of slings available, so people are finally able to get some of these and raise up this amazing species. Recently, I was able to get a sling from Fear Not Tarantulas, and I already adore this little booger. It's constructed a huge turret, and it's been eating great overall, exploding from its turret and grabbing prey. For those looking for a unique and totally cute spider, I encourage you to pick one of these guys up. Now we're at number 2 with a species that was not on the list last time. I am talking about Tarantulas murinus, or the infamous OBT. Back when I first attempted this list, I had planned to include one of my favorite spiders, my adult female P. murinus, or OBT. I had picked this girl up as a little brown sling way back in late 2012, and she had grown into one of the sweetest spiders I have ever kept. However, shortly before I started putting my list together, she passed away of old age. At that time, I was raising up several juveniles, but I hadn't sexed out a female yet, so I left one of my favorite all-time species off the list. Well, 2 years later, one of those juveniles grew into this gorgeous female here, allowing the OBT to take its rightful place on my list of favorite spiders. This little girl here has been a sweetheart. As with all of my OBTs, I gave her plenty of room to web, and she has given me no problems at all. Now, as everyone knows, I love the color orange, so I have a thing for orange spiders. The OBT, in my opinion, is one of the most beautiful orange spiders available. And for those who have heard the rumors that they have terrible and aggressive dispositions, and I am doing quotes for aggressive, if you give them room to do their thing, do some webbing, do some burrowing, you will likely have a more shy than defensive spider. The P. murinus is one of my all-time favorite tarantula species, and this girl here has easily become one of my favorite spiders. I am so glad to have another beautiful girl in my collection. And then finally, we come to number one, which should be no surprise to anybody that has watched Tom's Big Spiders. It hasn't changed. I am talking about the Grammostolepolcrapes, or the Chaco golden knee. This here is my old female. I got this girl way back in 2012 as a 0.3 inch sling, just a teeny tiny little sling. It was her and her brother. And at that time, I was super excited about growing these up. Back when I first started researching tarantulas, I had put together a list of beginner species that I should start with, and the Chaco golden knee immediately piqued my interest. I had seen photos of this spider with this darker complexion with those golden stripes on the knees, and then I'd heard they got quite large, so I really needed to have one. Unfortunately, it took me several years before I finally got my first two. Now, I've shared this story before. I put them in ammoc box enclosures with about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of substrate. They ate a couple times, and then right around October or so, they buried themselves. I did not see them for several months, and I was totally convinced that I had killed them. It would have been my first losses ever in the hobby. And finally, around April of the next year, they both popped out again. I couldn't tell if they had molted. They didn't look like they put on any size, but they started eating again, and I never had to worry about them again after that because they did just fine. Now, this is a slow-growing species, but very worth it as far as I'm concerned. I have 3 females at the moment. They are all incredibly docile. Now, obviously, I usually say this whenever I talk about temperament. Temperament may vary from spider to spider. And sure, I'm sure somebody out there has one that is a little more high-strung. I've heard of a handful here and there, but overall, they are usually very, very calm. I do not hold spiders or any of my tarantulas, quite frankly. However, I'd be lying if I didn't say that one of these ended up in my hand a couple times because they just went out exploring. So very, very docile overall. Beautiful spiders. They sit out, as you can see with my girl here. I have her in an arachnocyst enclosure. She is always right out in the open looking pretty. I just love the species. I don't know. I think it's very personal between people. It's kind of like breeds of dogs. Certain people like different breeds of dogs. They can't necessarily explain why. In this case, the Grammostolepolcrapes, I can't tell you why. I just adore the species. And my big female here has definitely earned her spot as number one on my list of my favorite tarantulas that I keep. All right, so not to end on a sad note, but I do want to address this. While I was putting this video together, I started about a week ago. I had my list together. I started editing it, and I noticed that I only had older footage of my Alphalix. Now, I adore this spider, one of my favorite spiders in my collection by far, and I really wanted to include her, but I was using older footage, so I was like, let me see if I can get a feeding video. So I took her enclosure out. She was sitting there all ready to go right in the opening of her web den, and I dropped in a roach, and the roach ran over top of her, and she didn't budge. She passed away. I am absolutely gutted for this one. It looks like she passed peacefully. I mean, it's one of those deals where there's been a lot of discussion about how long these spiders live. I've heard from a couple people who have raised them and even paired them that you can expect probably 4 to 5 years is more reasonable. So she's around 4.5 or so. So it makes sense, but absolutely gutted. I almost took her out of this video, but I decided in the end, it's a spider I kept until very, very recently, obviously. And she's one that introduced me to the Pluridae, which have become some of my favorite spiders to keep. So we kept her on here. Unfortunately, obviously, she won't be on the next one. Really still bummed about this, but ugh. Other things I want to address is after doing this video, I noticed there was a couple spiders that should have been on this. For one, my M. balfouri, whether it be my single female, who I've realized now is about 12 years old, so one of my older spiders, and the communal, which are all pushing 10 years old, I believe now. I absolutely adore them. And Big Bertha, my Lasiodora parahybana, or a salmon bird eater that I absolutely adore. She probably should have been on this list somewhere. There are many, many, many more spiders that should have been included. This is kind of the fun part and kind of the frustrating part about putting together one of these lists is you put the list together, you're all excited about it, then you replay it through, and then you walk around this room here and go, what about this one? What about this one? What about this one? I really do love them all. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What are your favorite spiders? It's always fun sometimes sitting down. What are the ones you go up there and you get super excited about, either just seeing out in the open, feeding them, or ones that you're just watching? Because in some cases you pick up a spider like I did with the Megacarapace and you're not sure what to expect and you're waiting to see how big is it going to get? How big is that carapace going to get? What are the colors going to look like? Which are the ones that excite you? All right, so that will do it for this one overall, and that'll probably be the end of our summer fun videos. When we come back, we'll be doing some rehousings. I have a lot of rehousings to do, so Billy will be back in the picture and doing the recording for us, so those will be a lot of fun. As always, I appreciate everybody who's checked out these videos. I know a lot of you guys have taken time to check them out and comment, and I really do appreciate it. All right, and finally, my outro, and everybody knows what's coming. If you like this enough to subscribe, I truly appreciate it. Click the little circle up in there, put some other videos over in here. You take the time to comment, I'll take the time to respond. Just know it can take me a couple days, especially now that I'm back in school. Guys, as always, stay safe. Catch you all next time.